Should we do another one?
Yeah, please.
All right.
I'll try to do better this time.
No, you're great. That's actually the intro now. We're doing another loose one.
Thanks.
Welcome to Dat Fury Radio. I'm Howie Howard from Mr. Furious Records, joined again by Michael Carlson, experimental computer musician extraordinaire. Got a different question for Michael this time, though it kind of jumps off and backward from our previous conversation, which ended up being a lot about Dolby Atmos and surround formats for audio and things like that, as well as his excellent recent collaboration with some other great artists as Tremble with Joy, their new project Born Trembling. But as part of that, go back and listen to it if you haven't. But as part of that, we talked a little bit about a piece of software called Renoise. Now, and Michael will correct or add on to me, but for anyone who hasn't heard of it, it's probably most of you, Renoise is a type of music-making software called a tracker. And a tracker software is a type of music-making that's like if synthesizers met samplers met spreadsheets. That's what it's going to look like anyway. And in a way that's maybe a little bit what it's like to use. Think of a beginner, Michael,
Sure.
not your current state of knowledge.
All right.
This is something I had not heard of until until you, actually. I think you're probably the first person to mention a tracker to me. But the profile of this way of making music has been on the rise recently, and especially with some hardware trackers that are now available and have only come out in the past few years. These include things like the Polyend Tracker, Tracker Mini, and Tracker Plus, the Dirty Wave Mate or M8. I think you're supposed to call it the Mate, which is a wonderful little... I'm very tempted by this thing, by the way. I've never used a tracker, and the Mate looks super fun. There's the Clockwork Pi. There's the Pico tracker. In Eurorack, there's the XOR or exclusive. I don't know how to say this company's name. Exclusive or Nerd Sequencer, Nerd SEQ. Anyway, so that's a little tiny bit about trackers.
And before all those, LSDJ on your Game Boy.
Did not know that.
So if you've got a Game Boy, you can get the LSDJ software, and you don't need to buy a hardware tracker.
There you go. So lots of options these days, and including all those software options. You may need an old computer to run some of them, but lots of software options as well. And there's a whole community around this way of making music. So our kickoff question for one question, Michael, is, as a long-time software tracker user, what's it been like to see this hardware coming out and see people talking about trackers and making music with trackers and the increased awareness of this way of making music?
Obviously, I think it's super cool. I think some of it is kind of fueled by a bit of nostalgia, because trackers were initially developed as a way for software developers to add music to their computer games. And so that's kind of why it's kind of comes from a place of nostalgia, because a lot of the oldest trackers, they did 8-bit sounds. So like I mentioned on the Game Boy, they used their own tracker software to make the music that went into the Game Boy games. Likewise, many computer games, they use their own trackers. And so several of the older generation trackers, they originated from software engineers just out of necessity. They needed a way to get music into their games. Hence the whole spreadsheets kind of programming style as far as, the way it works. So if you've never seen a tracker, but you're familiar with other DAWs, the most shocking thing to you is the fact that it's vertically oriented instead of horizontal. And instead of I mean, you can use a regular MIDI keyboard. So Renoise is one of the most fully featured trackers out there. And so you can, it's a real DAW. I mean, it has native plugins. It can host VSTs. It can do MIDI. It can do sampled sounds. It can do all of the things. And so I got into trackers because in the early 90s, a friend of mine had an Amiga 500, and he showed me the tracker software that was in it, and I was just completely blown away. This was back when regular Intel PCs could barely monotask with a monochrome screen. Amiga was far and away, it was a gaming computer, but it was also it was a multimedia powerhouse. And so I kind of stuck with trackers because that's what I learned on, and I'm total hobbyist. I'm not like super nerdy about music theory. I don't play any real instruments, but trackers gave me a way to access that kind of creativity in a way that made sense to me. And so since that time, anytime I listen to music, my brain interprets it as, how could I recreate this with a tracker? What kind of effects would I use? How many channels would I need? And so that's just the way I interpret music. And so the fact that there are now all of these hardware options is really cool, because now you don't need to lug around a laptop to do the thing. However, it's also kind of a slippery slope, because I've got some friends that are into some modular synths, and I can see hardware trackers being the exact same kind of honey trap. And so I personally have not gotten too close to any other actual hardware trackers, because it's one of those things. It's like, okay, well, now I've got the hardware tracker, now I got to play with the hardware tracker, and oh no, there's this other hardware tracker, and I got to spend more money to get that one. And I'm like, no, I'm lazy, and B, I just need to, have the lowest kind of hurdle to get from I have an idea to making the music. So it's better to just stick with what I know. In fact, there was a period of time there where I was kind of so on again and off again that the tracker that I used last time was either no longer supported, or there's this newer tracker that was out now that had even more features. And so for like a period of like 8 years, I would learn one tracker, and then I'd get distracted with life stuff, and I go back to do tracking. It's like, let me try this other one instead. And so spend all my time learning that one, and then get distracted by life things, and then I got to do it again. And so one of the cool things about Renoise is it's portable, and so you can get a version that works on Windows, on Mac, or Linux. And so at that point, I was like, okay, I'm sold. So I can go through as many computers as I want, and I can still use the same core piece of software. I don't have to relearn everything all over again the next time I have to set things aside for life and pick it back up later. So, and there are so many features that Renoise has that I haven't even dug into. So I wouldn't even consider myself an expert, but yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, a little bit of counterpoint to the danger of hardware trackers, right? Number one, I don't know, and I'm not an expert on them, but I don't think any of them are as fully featured as Renoise, right? You're just not
maybe. No. Yeah, certainly. Yeah,
that
probably
into hardware.
Yeah, probably not as fully featured as Renoise. But again, it all depends on why are you using a tracker. Is it because you want that 8-bit sound and you want to be kind of authentic about it? Great. And maybe for you, the hardware tracker is all you need. Don't need to get a special computer. Don't need to get a sound card. Don't need to do anything else. It's got all you need in that one box. Perfect. Go for it.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of use cases. I mean, I think for some people it's a scratch pad to get ideas down that then they will take and flesh out in a on a different piece of hardware or in a DAW or something like that. I don't know. This is what might actually sell me on a mate at some point, but and maybe you can speak to this. I don't know much about the export capabilities and like moving songs or sessions or whatever as tracker files. I imagine it's all pretty siloed, and it would be hard to take something from a mate to Renoise or from a Polyend tracker to some other piece of software.
Good question. So that's kind of the neat thing about trackers is since it's all code, you can transcode it typically from one format to another. So, for example, with Renoise, even though it's got its own proprietary format, it can import some of the older style modules that I made on older trackers. So I don't know enough about the Mate tracker or the Polyan tracker to know what format they're using, but I'd like to think that unless the makers of those devices really locked down their format, there's got to be a way to export it one way or another. And that's one of the really cool things about tracked music is it takes so much less space versus a full-blown, using WAV files for every track in a DAW. So that was kind of what the other kind of neat avenue with trackers back in the day is the demo competitions, where the challenge was to do the most jaw-dropping graphics and sound you possibly could on an old 512K floppy disk or less. And there are some demo competitions where it's like you're limited to 1 kilobyte to do all of your graphics and your sound. And so I can take a tracked file, and so I do like long form drone stuff that the bulk of the file size is just the samples that I use for the sounds. Or if I'm using a VST, it's even less space than that. And from there, it's with Renoise, it's like an XML file that says, okay, here's the structure of your tracks. Here are the commands to play the various instruments, and here are the commands for the effects. And I can take like a 50-minute song, and it would still be like 200K.
Right. So the competitions are like a really important part of tracker culture. Do you want to say more about that for people who may not have heard about that before?
Yeah, so the demo competitions, there are things that I am aware of and have always been intrigued by, but have never participated in, and nor have I ever been able to attend. However, as a youngster, I was able to capture through various BBSs the demo files that they played, copied them to my floppy disk, and stuck them into my Amiga and played them. I think you can find many YouTube videos now that are basically someone took a capture of the demo. And so I would say, yeah, just do a YouTube search for demo or demo scene, and you'll find some really intriguing things that you'd be amazed that they did that back in the 80s or 90s with hardware that your mobile phone today is millions of times more powerful.
Right, orders of magnitude more powerful. Yeah. So this is there's almost a parallel to like battle rhyming or something, right? Where it's this generally friendly competition to one up each other and show your skills, show how much you can do, and then with the tracker specifically, you have that limited amount of memory or file size that you're allowed. So there's this hard limit. You can't win just by like pulling in resources. You've got to be efficient and smart about how you're doing it all. I'll find a good link to throw in for something like that. Anything else on trackers?
No, I mean, again, that's what I use because that's what I learned. In fact, the kind of music I make doesn't lend itself well to trackers. It's almost certainly the wrong tool for long form drone stuff. In fact, the tool I use most often in Renoise is the LFO, and so that So yeah, if you were to look at the actual file itself, it would be extremely dull because it's like play this note, wait several minutes while I slowly change an effect, play another note, wait several minutes while I slowly change another effect. And so trackers are most commonly used for like breakcore, drum and bass, really rhythmic, fast-paced things. In fact, there's some genres of music that can only be done with trackers because it's like a million BPM. I think it's black MIDI is what they call it. I guess I don't know. I assume you can do black MIDI on things that are not trackers, but trackers lend themselves really well to formats like that.
Definitely. That actually reminds, will you say a little bit more about what the file for one of your pieces is like? That's something I've always wanted to ask you. Is actually, like, tell me a little bit about your columns and rows in your in like a REM state piece.
So it'll be anywhere from like 4 to 18 tracks that I'll use. Another neat thing another capability that Renoise has is the ability to send audio to a send track. So again, like a regular DAW, which I think most of it's like an aux track or a send track. So with Renoise, you can likewise create send tracks that you can send the audio from several of your vertical column tracks to a common track for common processing of effects and things. So that's a way to economize your computer resources. Likewise, it's a good way to route your audio to achieve certain effects. Like if you got one send track that's got a certain set of effects and another send track with a very different set of effects, you can either switch the sends or do multi-band send, which is a gimmick that I use a lot for taking my Renoise stereo tracks and converting them into quadraphonic. Is I will split them up sonically between low frequencies and high frequencies and route them to different speakers that way. And so, yeah, it's what you get when you look at a REM state Renoise file is going to vary a little bit depending upon what I'm trying to achieve and how crazy I am at trying to achieve it.
Do you would you loop ever, or does it just like play through the sequence one time?
Great question. So there are a couple of my tracks where I set it up so it'll just do an infinite loop. So with Renoise, you can put a command on one of the tracks that says stop playing here. Otherwise, if you don't do that, it'll just automatically reloop back to the beginning and start over again. And so
right, looping is the default behavior, like a sequencer, oftentimes 16 steps or whatever.
Yep.
And a lot of tracker music is based on loops of a bar or two or four like that. Mm-hmm. But listening to REM state is if that type of short looping is in there, you don't hear it.
Yeah. So if you want to see what REM state tracks look like, on my website, I've actually got a little remix section where I have provided both the source Renoise files as well as audio stems if you wanted to use a regular DAW. So you can get I think Renoise, you can get a free demo, and the tracker itself is really affordable compared to some others. But I think even with the free demo, you can just download it, load in my track, and you can just kind of see what I did there. Likewise, I think for someone like you, if you want to kind of dip your toe into trackers, look into something called Sunvox.
Okay.
So I mentioned Renoise is portable, that you can use it on Windows, Mac OS, or Linux. Sunvox is it's a really cool blend of software modular synthesis and tracker. And it is super portable. So I think I've seen it on like old BlackBerry phones. So you can get a desktop version, you can get a version for your iPhone, your iPad, your Android phone, Linux, Windows, I'm pretty sure. And so that one is really, really portable. And I think if you want to dip your toe into kind of trackers, but you're also like a modular synth head and you like to build your own soft synths, I think that is going to eat up all of your time if you would let it.
That sounds super interesting.
I personally really should dedicate some time into actually digging into Sunvox and using it myself, because it is a tracker in that you use the tracker style to set up your patterns of notes and effects that you play, but it's not locked to the grid. You can take those various patterns and you can just kind of place them wherever you want, it looks like. And so it's really flexible and it's super powerful, and I really ought to spend more time playing with that.
That reminds me a little bit of a sequencer, a sample sequencer I used on iPad. I actually used it. My first night mode record was largely based on this sequencer. It's called Cyclic.
Okay.
And the interface it looked like tree rings. It was 16
Okay, cool.
circles, concentric circles, and you had these nodes that were associated with a sample, and you could load. It came with samples. You could load your own samples, and so to trigger a sample, you would grab its node from the staging area or whatever, and just drag it onto one of the circles, and the innermost circle triggers every single beat on a 16th note.
Gotcha.
Second circle every second beat, third circle every third beat. And so you very quickly get into, even if you're only using the innermost circles, you very quickly get into sort of polymetric long phrases. And there's probability, and there was
cool.
quantization, note quantizations, and it would play the samples back at different pitches, and super fun. And basically, I never went back to it. I should go back to it and do something. I never went back to it.
Sure.
But it's what I'm pretty sure all, or at least 4 out of the 5 songs. This would be Dear X Spike.
Right on. Cool. Oh yeah. Okay.
But that's where those songs started, and then it recorded internally too.
Okay.
So I would record a jam. I mean, I'd have a piece kind of composed. I would jam around, come up with something, including an arrangement, and then I would do a performance of that all internally within Cyclic.
That's cool.
And get like a stereo wave, drop that into the DAW, and overdub from there.
Cool. I'm gonna have to listen to that again now that I know a little bit about, have some insight on how.
Yeah, it was a fun, different, totally different way to make music, and really, maybe this is a good kind of wrap up, and I'll give you a chance to jump in on this too. But like, from Cyclic as sort of a non-traditional sample sequencer to when I got the 404 SX and had the experience of, just a brand new way of making music that mostly had not much to do with what I already knew, to you with your first, and early experiences with trackers. It can be so much fun and so freeing, I guess, that's what I'm coming around to, is the freedom of a new way of making music that just kind of blows past preconceptions by default and puts you in a totally new space that you have to figure out and be creative even to make sound happen.
Yeah, and that's for me, that's a lot of the reasons why I do music is it's creative problem solving. And so I liken it to solving the puzzle as I'm making the puzzle. And so I've got the experimental artist label, but experimental not in the academic sense, but experimental in I don't know what I'm doing and I'm figuring it out by trying things. And so for me, a lot of the fun of making the music, be it in a tracker or trying something new, is just how can I achieve this effect, or what happens if I take this and add that. And so for me, that's really what it's all about, is kind of surprising myself by making some things happen. And to me, that's the kind of stuff that I really enjoy.
I love it. That's where we're going to leave it. I never thought about the creative person as both the puzzle maker and puzzle solver, or puzzle putter together.
Yes.
I love that. I'm going to think on that for a while. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Good to catch up. Thank you, listeners. Thank you for checking out Dat Fury Radio. Tell your friends, shares and likes and reviews are what we survive on here. So if you enjoyed this and you're still listening, please tell your friends. Please give a listen to Tremble with Joy, Born Trembling, out now on False Walls. There will be a link to that in the notes and description. And until next time, we've been Dat Fury Radio.